were talking about before, you had wanted to leave television.
Well, see, I never did want to, to jump back, I'd gone to film school. What I was interested in was movies. I was interested in films. But my first real job that paid anything was in television. And not only did it pay, it also got me into the Writers Guild, into the TV branch. And so therefore my career sort of, I was not that, I was more passive than I am now about my career. If I was presented with an opportunity and it was a good opportunity, I would take it. So because it was television, I have described it this way. I have said publicly, I took the money and I didn't do what I wanted to do, which was write movies and make movies. There's some sense to that. I mean, there's some truth to that. I did take the money, and I did not do what I really wanted to do. What it doesn't explain is that I did also enjoy what I was doing, mainly the people that I was working with, and I enjoyed the process. Minnesota Strip was more like a feature than a television show. And once it had been on the air, I got a lot of attention for it, and actually different representation. William Morris came around, and I signed with them because I was starting to be thought of as differently than I had been. I guess I was starting to be thought of in sort of an auteur sense, or I was still pretty young, but that someone with a voice, I guess, as a result of that movie.
Did anyone describe that voice to you, or could you describe what that voice was at that point?
I can't, but it began to be the start of me having a reputation for being dark. And in the case of Minnesota Strip, that was looked upon as a good thing because it was a success. So after something is a success, it's okay if it's dark. But before something is a success, it's not good if it's dark. So, but I began to have that reputation, which is my way of explaining what that style probably was. Minnesota Strip was for a television movie on ABC, was fairly hard-hitting, a little strange. Very naturalistic. Did not have a happy ending. It had a rock and roll soundtrack. If any of that sounds familiar, then that's where it started. Or that's when I first got to show it.
What did you do? Again, what did you want to do with that? What you've got this off the Minnesota Strip. You're now considered an auteur, like you said.
The beginnings of auteurism. What I really did say was I began to show that I had a voice. People began to see me as not part of the Rockford Files umbrella, or a guy who works for Steve Cannell, or a TV series writer. And my hope was that I could then cross over into feature films, because I thought it was a better platform, and in a sense it was.
Did you have story ideas, film ideas that you were pitching?
Yeah, I did. I did have film ideas. I don't know that I was actively pitching them, but I did have. You know, by this time, I mean, when I went to film school, I said before I didn't know how films were made. I didn't know. At that time, I didn't know how the set worked. Okay, a real professional set. I made student films, but I didn't know how a professional set worked, a professional post-production, or logistics. I knew none of that. But I'd been to film school, so of course I'd been exposed to a lot of foreign films and classic American films. So that was my area of interest.
You kind of stayed in television now.
I tried to get over into features, and I just couldn't do it. I got hired around this time this woman who worked for in the Universal Feature Department. She had seen Minnesota Strip, and she liked it quite a bit. And she had read this idea. She had read this book. She had an idea about a woman from Rutgers, a professor, who was writing about females committing violent crime. That was her area of study. Crimes against property and violent crime. Street crime. This is like 1981. And it was this person's theory that the fact that women were committing violent crimes against crimes of property and crimes of violence proved that the feminist movement was working, because these were the kind of things only men had done: breaking and entering and armed robbery. This was only for men. But now women were doing it too, and she was very proud of that fact. Well, it's a ludicrous premise, and this woman, Anne Biondi, saw right away the comic potential for that. And I read the book, and I had written this thing about this little women criminal, or this girl tied up, this little prostitute tied up with these crooks. And so I guess it seemed to her like I would be a good guy to write that feature. So I did. So that was my first, actually, I think, mainstream paid feature assignment for Universal, was to write that script. It was called Female Suspects. And it never got made, but it attracted a lot of attention. It was all over Hollywood. It came close so many times, I can't tell you. And it helped my reputation a great deal. And
Would you want to make it today?
sometimes I think so. I had an opportunity after The Sopranos was a hit. Amy Pascal, who's head of Columbia, had been a development executive for a guy named Tony Garnett in 1980, an independent producer from England. She loved that script and wanted Tony Garnett to make it. And so 20 years later, when she's now president of Columbia, she wanted to do it again. And at that point, I wasn't ready, because it was criminals in New Jersey. And I was doing that already, and I just didn't want to do it again. Sometimes I think I'd like to. But strangely enough, that script is something no one's seen, but is probably one of the building blocks of my career. I had a contract at Universal, because what I would do is I would take these TV development deals. At that point in time, what I was doing was I would take these TV development deals and try to do as little as I could in developing television series, but use them kind of as a fellowship, support my family, while I was writing movies on the side. And but every once in a while, I'd have to show something. I'd have to deliver something, deliver a script, or do something for Universal. And my friend Larry Connor, and I met this guy Larry Connor, who was on the lot too. He was doing the same thing. He was a feature writer though. So he was picking up a chunk of change every year, having this TV development deal, which he kind of ignored and tried to, a lot of people did that, try to negotiate your way through it. You don't have to do much. And he and I became friendly, and we came up with this idea of doing a show in which every week would be built around a rock and roll song. And the story would be thematically related to the rock and roll song. And we pitched it to Robert Harris, a really smart executive at Universal, really good guy. And he got into it right away, but he said, but you can't do, it can't be, it's got to be a series. It can't be an anthology like that. So we designed this thing about a guy who was a music fanatic since he was a kid. And it went from, it really was about a couple who met in high school. It's kind of based on, Larry had been married a long time at that time, so had I. He'd been married very young, so had I. So it was based on these two, in the show, two people who meet in high school, get married, get divorced, and it's in the present day, and they are now divorced, and they have two children. And the show worked such that we would go back into the past. In other words, it's hard to explain, but you'd pick a rock and roll song from 1965, and you'd design a story that would start in the present day. Then you'd go back into the past when that song was popular. The character was portrayed by Timothy Daley. Would either play he was a disc jockey. He would either play it on the radio, or he'd hear it playing, or he would think about a song from his past, and it would take him, as a mnemonic device, take him back into time, and you'd play out a story that took place in the past. I mean, it had been going on for a long time. I didn't invent this by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, Scorsese had been doing this, and Stanley Kubrick had been doing this, and I had wanted to do this since I was like 19. Put music and picture together and see what happens. So Mita Rosenberg, who was the producer on Minnesota Strip, was a tough lady. So she fought for our ability to do that. I remember we went up to, they didn't want to do it. We went up to see this guy, Harry Garfield, who was the head of music for Universal Television. And she said, you know, our associate producer, Harry, tells us that we're asking for you to contact these bands in England to get permission, and we need to get going. We're nothing. We don't. He says, I call them every day. And she said, well, we're not getting the songs. We need to have the songs. And he says, well, these aren't normal people. They don't sleep when you and I sleep. They're rock and roll musicians. And it was so outlandish to him that we would even be trying to do this. So we never did get any bands from England, but they had an artist named John Hyatt, really good rock and roll artist. And we used a couple of songs. MCA Universal, he was on their label, so we used a couple of his. And it worked out really well. And it was, you know, blues influenced hard rock. And I did it again. I had a Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels song and the Alfred Hitchcock thing that was there. I shouldn't have done it. It doesn't really work that well. And then Almost Grown was all that. It was all music and picture.
It lasted 13 episodes. Why did it go off the air?
It didn't. They didn't even screen. They only broadcast 8 of them. It went off the air because they didn't like it. It was starting. It didn't. It had no numbers at all when it first started, and no critical notice. Then, as we were going along, critics started to write about it, and it was starting to pick up momentum. But they didn't know what to make of it. It was too dark. And the network, who had loved it, started to not have faith in it, and it wasn't what they wanted. And these were all people. Now, the networks were being run by this time by baby boomers, people like myself. So they really related to it. They loved all that music. They were getting off on it, but they made a divide between themselves and the audience. What I like isn't what the audience likes. What I like isn't what the audience is going to like. This is a crucial mistake that was constantly made in Hollywood. That you shouldn't please yourself in your work somehow, or be able to stand behind it because you believe in it and love it. So they began to be disenchanted with it. Plus, it was costing a lot of money. It was an expensive show. And my theory has always been that Universal went to CBS and said, look, cancel this thing, and we'll give you like some PI show or some cop show. We're spending too much money on this thing. And so they canceled it. They had given us, actually, after we had done 13 of them, they had commissioned 4 more scripts. And we were working on those scripts when they canceled it.
You said
and within 2 days, the sets were gone. In fact, we were trying to do reshoots for the last episode while they were destroying the sets. They had, skip loaders on the set. We were trying to shoot. We said, "Can we please have it quiet?" And the 2 guys are like sitting there, like they have a blanket on the floor and they're talking. And as soon as we cut, they'd mow down all the house, everything we built. They just destroyed it because they had already rented it out. They canceled it one day. The sets were gone 3 days later, and they had rented the stage out by the 3rd day. So they knew this was coming. They knew what they were doing.
But you didn't?
No, I thought we were doing better. I thought it was starting to get some critical attention. And I thought maybe we'd actually have a chance. But I have to go back and say that when I first heard about the fact that they had picked up that show, my agent called me and said, no, I guess I was at Universal, and I heard that CBS had picked it up. So I called my agent and I said, guess what? They picked up Almost Grown. He said, oh, that's fine. I said, no, you got to get me out of it. My life is over. Now what am I going to do? He said, what are you talking about? I said, I want to do movies. I don't want to do a TV series. Don't be stupid. Go to work on this show. Are you crazy? You're not going to pull out of it now. They'll sue you. So this is not a good place to be in. When they canceled it, as brokenhearted as I was secretly glad inside because I thought, now I'll be able to go and do movies.
And what did you do?
I tried and it didn't work. I wrote scripts, none of them got made.
So how are you earning your living then?
After that, I got a big TV development deal at what was called Lorimar at that time. That's how I went from TV development deal to TV development deal.
Why do you think the TV development deals worked so well for you while you couldn't get into film? What was it that distinguished you as a television guy?
That's what I'd done. And I would write scripts. I mean, I wrote some scripts on spec, and I got a few writing assignments. I think I wrote a feature script for most every big studio, but when they were done, they just never got made. I came close. Ridley Scott was going to do one once. Michael Mann was almost going to do the same one once. I got close, but they were too dark. They were comedies mostly. And it was the same tone. Everything, you only have one voice. It was the same tone that you see in The Sopranos. That was the tone that those were written in. But nobody got it.
Were you asked to lighten it up?
No. We never used that expression, lighten it up.
You eventually went to I'll Fly Away as a producer.
Yeah, I had a deal at Lorimar, a 2-year deal. And I wrote probably 4 or 5 pilots while I was there, and a feature script on the side. And the pilots that I wrote, none of them got made. Again, so I was getting I was getting the same rap in television too, as being too dark, too complicated, too out there. And my deal was coming to an end, so I'd been there for 2 years. I was by this time we were on the Warner Brothers lot. And I was basically lying in my office, depressed, nothing going on, no TV, no movies, just writing with no result. And then I heard that, I read the networks made their announcement, and I saw that they had picked up a show called I'll Fly Away about the civil rights struggle in the South in the 60s by Josh Brand and John Falsey. And somehow I said, I bet you they're going to call me to go work on this show. I thought, this is it. I'll Fly Away, and that's what it was. So they offered me to co-exec producer with them, which I did.
Did you bring any changes to the series?
I think I brought that same tone, sort of a certain level of humor, or I can't find the word for what it is. A certain kind of humor, deadpan, strange humor I brought to it. And also I think what I brought to the show was an attempt to make it also sort of more accessible, that would also be about teenage life and about like Sam Waterston's kids who were in high school. Sort of be more about their lives, although that was all in the pilot that Josh and John had done. But here's what I did was I tried to make it more like a 50s. It took place in the early 60s. I tried to make it more like the kind of movies they made then. I put drag racing in it and some car crashes and stuff like that. That wasn't in the pilot, and that was not their natural inclination. So I kind of brought this sort of rebel without a cause, more cinematic stuff that I liked into it. And I remember the first thing I wrote, that the protagonist, Forrest Bedford, this attorney, had to go to a black funeral home to ask some questions about some case. And so the conversation took place in the afternoon in this black funeral home, and there was a coffin, an open coffin, in the background of the shot, with a guy lying in it, a dead man lying in it. And I remember Josh Brand saying, that was a great touch to go to the funeral home. He said, that was really great. He said, but why you would stage it in front of the casket? I guess I probably wouldn't do that. I wouldn't have the casket in the shot. And I thought to myself, well, why would you go to a funeral home? I don't understand. What's so bizarre? I mean, that's where they work. That's what they do, is they embalm people and display them. So why wouldn't you have that? I never asked him why he wouldn't have that in the shot, but I think he thought it was a little bit unseemly. So what I'm trying to say is, if you can call that bringing something to the show, I brought that, whatever that is. The Rockford Files came back as a series of 2-hour movies, and I wrote one of those and wrote and directed one of those. Yeah, and right after that, I made a deal at Burlstein Gray, a development deal. And again, I was there for 2 years, wrote 2 pilots, nothing got made. But I was able to write 2 other screenplays while I was there, also which didn't get produced. But I wrote 2 pilots, one a year there. And as I was going out the door, Brad Gray and Lloyd Braun, who worked for Brad, called my agents and said, you know, it's terrible. We've had David here 2 years. He's written 2 great pilots, and he's done everything he was supposed to do. And maybe we didn't sell him right. And we've heard that HBO is looking for some kind of different material. And that gangster thing he wrote, The Sopranos, maybe they would want it, which they did. So that was like at the last gasp. My deal was over. I was going to have to take yet another development deal at Fox and become a producer on Millennium. And the day that HBO finally agreed to make The Sopranos was the day I had to sign the contract for Fox. If HBO said no, I was going to have to go to work at Fox the next day, working for Chris Carter.
So talk about the conception of The Sopranos. How did that start? How did you begin writing that?
It started as a feature idea. My wife had always told me that my mother was good for a laugh, and she was right. My mother, in her eccentricity, always made people laugh, and I would always had a huge payload at any party. I could get people really interested or in stitches just telling the truth about things my mother had done. And my wife had always said, well, you got to write about that character. And I kept thinking, oh, why would I ever do that? And how could I ever do it? And then someone had suggested when I was working at Almost Grown, I was telling Robin, I was telling her about my mother too. And she said, oh, you should make a show about a TV producer and his mother. And I always thought, well, who would ever want to see that? And then somewhere along the line, I got this idea that maybe if it was about a gangster, if it wasn't somebody like me, if it was about someone who really is a hard-ass, tough guy, and takes shit from nobody and is a criminal, had a mother that it might be more palatable. In other words, he wouldn't be a soft, yuppie TV producer like myself. He'd be a tough guy with this impossible mother. And I thought that would make a good movie. And the story of it was what actually played out in The Sopranos in the first season, which is his mother can't live by herself. He has to put her in a nursing home. This was all autobiographical. And she resented it tremendously. Then where the autobiography stopped was in the movie, she's so upset with him that she tries to have some gang guys in the gang kill him. That was what the movie was going to be about. And I conceived it for De Niro and Anne Bancroft. But again, I pitched it around, and in fact, my agent said to me, a mob comedy? Come on. Mob movies are dead, number one, and a mob comedy? Forget it.
What was it called?
It didn't have a name. It was just this idea. About a mobster in therapy was what it was called. So then the first job I did when I got to Burlstein Gray was they gave me this pep talk, and they said they believed, this is the truth, they said that they believed that I had a great TV series in me. And I thought, what is that about? I don't even want to have a great TV series. And they said, we believe that you could break the envelope. And I was very sort of touched by that and intrigued by that notion that they would think that. Not that I didn't think I didn't have any talent. It wasn't a question of that, but it was that was not where my interests lie. So Lloyd Braun said, for example, we want to do things that are different. Sitcom business in the toilet, it's over. So we got to get into the hour business. So we were thinking, what would you say to an hour series, like a TV version of The Godfather? And I said, no, I don't want to do that, because it had already been on. So I thought, to myself, so there's going to be guys with the 1940s with those old cars and machine guns and long coats. It's going to be an inferior version than what we've seen. And I was driving home and I remembered this idea I had about a mobster in therapy. I thought, well, maybe that could work as a TV series. And what might be good about it is the mother is a woman. You could also then explore the females in that family more. The wife, on television, you could explore the wife, the daughter, the mother, because mom movies, you know, except for Goodfellas, the women are certainly in the background. But, you know, Lorraine's part in Goodfellas was the first time you'd seen a mobster's wife, and she had a substantial part. So I thought that maybe this idea, because it had such family dynamics to it, mother, wife, daughter, could work as a TV show, because the female audience is something that is a large segment of this, I think, maybe drives the TV audience. And so I pitched it, and this was at Fox, and they liked it, and we did the script, and then they didn't buy it. And so it sat there for 2 years, and then HBO picked it up.
How close was that script that you sent over to Fox? How close was that to the first episode?
To me, it's quite a bit different. I mean, I think the whole tone of it is different. The story was basically the same, but the characters were different. I had written it as a TV series. So it wasn't honest. It wasn't honest to what a real organized crime member in the New York metropolitan area would be like. It was, it had a few curse words in it, and I was worried, how are we going to ever do this on a weekly basis? I mean, but these guys can't talk this network television profanity, like get your butt out of here and stuff like that. They can't. So I didn't know how that was going to work. So the two versions are quite different in that it became, I think, more realistic, more true to the reality of organized crime life, and more cinematic.
Is that because you went to HBO with it?
HBO, yeah, HBO. I knew they were open to all that. I mean, you know, there was no broadcast standards department at HBO. There's no one that tells you, you know what, they can't burp. Well, you know, during the birthday when they're singing Happy Birthday, you can't have the guy burp. There's nobody doing that.
Do you know how the show was? How it went to HBO?
Yes, they called my agent, and then Brad Gray went and saw Chris Albrecht. Said, I know you guys want to do more original programming. You should take a look at this. And Brad and Chris have a long-standing relationship. Chris looked at it. I was called in for meetings. They wanted to rewrite, and I certainly wanted to rewrite it. Because one of the compromises no one had asked me to do this, but one of the compromises I had made when it was going to be at Fox was that nobody got killed. There was no murder in it, in that original version. And that was for two reasons. One was because I thought it was kind of a cliche to have people killed in a mob movie. And the other thing was I thought, well, they won't let if the hero kills somebody, or if there's a murder in the pilot, this thing will never get on the air. And because I was always so torn, I could think to myself, well, good, then it won't get on the air. But I didn't put a murder in it. But by the time we went to HBO, I thought somebody should get killed in here. So I contrived another story, a B story, in which there was a murder. So they brought me in for some meetings, and they said they wanted to rewrite, and I wanted to rewrite, and I went ahead and did that rewrite. And it had come close at Fox to being made, and other networks had kind of been interested in it. I remember I went to a network which will remain nameless, and the guy said, the head of it said, look, this is obviously very different. And the killing and the robbing and all that stuff, I got no problem with that. But does he have to take Prozac? And I said, yeah, well, that's part of it. Is he going to be in therapy? I said, yeah. I don't like that. So HBO got the whole package. But they understood it completely. But while I was making those rounds, I would talk to production people, and they'd say to me, "It's set in New Jersey," like for example, at the network we went to, or at Fox, set in New Jersey. So what are you going to do? You're going to shoot the pilot back there? No, you're going to shoot the pilot here, and then go back to New Jersey for a couple of days to shoot some exteriors, and then cut it into the pilot, and then bring the series back here. I said, no, it's good. I want to shoot it in New Jersey. And I could see this look going like, you fucking idiot. What are you, crazy? What is it? What are you talking about? And everywhere I went, they would say that. So I'd say, no, I want to shoot more of it in Jersey. They say, oh, so you're going to do like NYPD Blue. You'll shoot the series out here, but you'll go back a couple of days every month or every 2 months and shoot some drive-bys or some scenes out in the street. I said, no, I want to shoot the whole thing in New Jersey. And they said, well, how's that going to work? It's going to cost, I said, New York and New Jersey. How's that going to work? So they were backing away from it on that aspect too. Then I went for my first meeting with Chris Albrecht. And we're getting along very well. It's all going well. And he says, well, it says here, written in New Jersey. It takes place in New Jersey. Now, you're going to film it there, right? Because that's what it says. You're not going to go take it back to Los Angeles and try to make it look like New Jersey, are you? And I said, no. We're going to shoot it in New Jersey. He said, good, because that's what we want. And I knew my life had taken a dramatic change, dramatic turn for the better.
And what about the terms of your deal with them, with HBO? How many? What was the number of episodes that they?
13. The first season was 13. It was the pilot plus 12.
And you directed the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
What did you want to establish in that pilot, stylistically?
I wanted to establish a cinematic style. I wanted it to be open. I wanted to leave things wide where I could. I wanted it, not everything spelled out. I wanted to tell the story visually where possible, if dialogue could be avoided. I wanted music to play a great part in it. And I didn't want it to be just talk, which is to me, what television is.
And how were you going to establish that? You said not the talk. What would be the elements that were in there?
I mean, I can't remember the specifics now, but to try to tell the story at times with a camera, with just watching a character behaving or doing something or just even thinking, or instead of talking about it. And I also wanted it to be complicated plot-wise. I wanted it not to be not everything tied up with a bow at the end, and I wanted it to be visually arresting. Most of TV to me is not. And the other guy who had, I think the guy who really made the difference in that regard was Michael Mann. I think once he did Miami Vice, I think the old system was dead, and the cost of television shows started to go up. 7-day show went out the window because you can't do that stuff in 7 days.
Now, when you were creating the series, how far in advance did you have the story arc planned for the first 13? Before you started?
For the first 13, I had the whole story because it was the story of that feature. Man is in therapy. We find out he's a gangster. He has troubles with his mother. He has competition in his OC life, his organized crime life. There's a crisis there. Those two storylines come together in that his mother falls in league with his enemies, tries to have him killed because it suits her purposes because she's so angry at him and she resents him so much and she's so depressed and distraught. And also, it suits the purposes of her accomplice, who is his uncle, who wants to take over, who wants to be the head of that family, of that small mob family. So those two stories wove together, and that's what the movie would have been. So the first season was that movie stretched out over 13 episodes.
And did you have a vision for it continuing along?
No, most things in Hollywood don't succeed. Most television scripts that are written don't get made into pilots. Most pilots that are shot don't get bought as series. And most series that go on the air don't last longer than 4 or 5 episodes. And I'm not being pessimistic, that's just the way it is. It's like, that's the way it's. There's only one egg that gets to this, one sperm that gets to the egg. It's sort of similar to that. They make a lot of stuff, and most of it is just waste, it goes by the boards. So I didn't think that it would ever happen. And then once we got picked up for a year, I didn't think that we'd be picked up for a second year, because most things fail. I mean, I think If you were to look statistically, most things do fail. Um, when I say most things fail, I mean for the amount of things that are developed, if you would put that next to the amount of stuff that the audience actually sees, there's a huge amount that doesn't make the grade. So I didn't think beyond the first 13.
And as you were writing the first 13, how much research did you do? How did you know about the crime families, how they operated?
I had been I was an aficionado of this stuff all my life. As I said earlier on, like The Public Enemy was with William Wellman's Public Enemy with Jimmy Cagney was I've said this a lot. We don't need to take our time up with this because it's in a million places. So that movie really inspired me, frightened me, and was a model for a lot of what I ever wanted to do. And then, of course, The Godfather happened. But I always loved gangster stories. The Godfather was, when that happened, I couldn't believe it. I thought, God, somebody's really doing a real Italian mob story with Italian actors. Only Toledo. And then Scorsese, of course, took that even further. Because the Godfather is a little more operatic and not so quotidian, not so everyday life. But Martin Scorsese, in Main Streets, I saw what I thought, my God, somebody did that. Look at it. There it is. There we are. I've never seen that before. There's us. There's the Italians. And Italian Americans. And that's what I was trying to do in this case, too.